Topbed Talk.
This piece is presented by Monty, Mythen and Desiree Chappell with Lee Fleisher, Emeritus Professor of Anesthesiology and Critical Care, University of Pennsylvania. It's a question and answer session which was a highlight of EBPOM London 2020. It works as a standalone piece or as a companion piece to the talk you'll find in the show notes called Am I Safe?
Lee, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, when it comes to, leadership and some of the things that you were referencing, the people who are most affected by anxiety, can you go through that constellation graph that you showed? Because I thought that was really interesting.
So what we found, and this one we still don't understand, is that the CRNA group were more anxious. And we looked at whether they had younger kids, they were home, other things, and we couldn't find it, but it was a small amount. But a lot of it was your baseline anxiety, who you are as a person. That's one of the strongest drivers for anxiety. The other thing that became really interesting is kept looking for PD to be the signal and directly affect the anxiety, which is the state anxiety or the anxiety in the moment. And what we found is it worked through what we call the emotional contagion or the emotional culture, so that how safe somebody feels to speak up and say, we don't think you have enough PPE, we are scared, and how much PPE you actually have work together to sort of make the entire environment either emotionally anxious or less so. And then what was important was the role of the leader. So Monty, as sort of the leader of the leaders, keeping people's anxiety down and, sending them for yoga, as you talked about this morning. What are those things that can make you less anxious and feel better?
I think if we did a reality check here, I'm not sure they'd all agree with you all the time, Lee, but we just had a request from Graham Walker here to explain the abbreviation CNRA, which is a very legitimate request. Desiree, perhaps you could do that one.
Desiree.
That's right. I am a CRNA, a certified registered nurse anesthetist. So anesthetist, I guess, wherever you are. And so I'm a nurse trained to deliver anesthesia here in the United States. And that falls under a certification process that we go through. And so commonly referred to as CRNA or nurse anesthetist.
On the boundaries on that, Desiree, you can practice as an independent. I don't want to go to in the very sensitive areas here, but you can practice fully independently in many places. Yeah,
there are states around the U.S. that we have full scope of practice in anesthesia and to work independently, yep.
Do you want to get into some of the Slido questions here, Desiree?
I think so, yeah, definitely. I think there's been some good ones that are popping up. Lee can handle anything.
It was Graham who asked that question about the CNRA. He's added some additional questions here. What is the evidence on perceived command gradient in residence and the fear of looking inadequate in front of peers and superiors? Bad for patient versus bad for me. What a great question.
That's the briefing study that we did. And we didn't look at, we're still trying to study this issue of first year, second year, third year. And we think this is some of the issues of, should I say, is there a millennial difference? But that fear of the story changing and taking personal accountability has become quite prevalent now. When we select residents, we want people who actually have learned how to fail. So if you go back to that 4 gradients, it used to be that people would say, well, if there's high psychological safety but high performance pressures, that as you go up the gradient, you're expected to do better, that if you fail, it's a bad thing, that anxiety, but we sort of flip it and say, no, you can fail because you're still a trainee and we're responsible and you need to learn. So I think it's real. And I think that's why psychological safety is so important as one of the mitigators to that. So hopefully that, in trying to understand the question, answers it.
Do you find the generations have started to change, Lee? I mean, this overlaps with the next question that says that they find that senior, and they put here consultant colleagues, so attendings, the the people at the top end, the older people within the organisation, are often the most resistant to culture change, and that they have the most influence over culture. Any advice on that?
It's very true. When I got to Penn, I was sort of in the middle. I was 43 when I became chair. So I had more senior colleagues who said, "You're not going to change us," and more junior colleagues who were pulling for a change. And in many ways, I just waited them out after 16 and a half years and diluted them, those who wouldn't change out. I think it's truly a tipping point. But the more interesting thing is, and we wrote another paper on this, is the way we talk to each other is actually different. And as you may know from previous talks, I have a linguistic anthropologist who's my collaborator on this type of work. And I had him sit in the room, and I had him watch the residents trying to talk to the senior faculty. And he said, we kept going like this, just missing each other. So it's really been interesting to work with them to get it where we kept saying, what do you want? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say, until we actually talk? And then our goals were more aligned than you think. The real problem is that we don't know how to talk to each other because some of those differentials.
Desiree, I'm sorry, I'm asking you questions now. You've been a change agent, and in some of the examples you shared with us in the past about leading or helping to lead some of the enhanced recovery programs in your neck of the woods, I noticed one of the examples you showed early on was one of the most senior attendings, surgical attendings, who looked like the least likely person to adopt dramatic change. I'm going to be judgmental here and suggest he was closer to the end of his career. And yet he was up for it. What defines those people in your experience?
Yeah, really interesting, because even our medical director, Pat Shanahan at the time, who was, ending kind of towards the end of his career, same thing. I mean, they've been doing it for a very long time. And you're referring to Dr. John David Walker, who was our general surgeon of 35 years, had done it the same way every day for those 35 years until we came along with our enhanced recovery program. And, there's a lot of different factors that come into that. And I've always enjoyed, Lee, listening to some of the things that you talk about. And those are all ideas that we use to try and get people on board. And with Dr. Walker, especially making sure that we were on the same page, that we were all working towards the same goal, and that we weren't trying to, butt heads against anything, that we were all moving for the same, improving patient quality outcomes. And then, just figuring out what works for that person. And that's what we did for Dr. Walker, saying, you don't have to change your technique. We got you on the front end and the back end of how we care for patients. We'll help you out. And that's kind of how we changed his mind. And it worked really well. And once he started doing it, once our senior leadership started to play a major role in the enhanced recovery program, it got others to come along. Even those who may not have wanted to come easily, they were feeling that bit of a competitive edge, I think. So I always say you have to appeal to what matters to the person that you're talking about. And that was one of them, competition, but as well as, improving patient outcomes.
So Desiree, you actually did something interesting. You went like this. And we always say that if you have a wall and you punch against it, you're going to push through somebody else. If somebody puts their hands up like this, there's no way you can push through it. You got to actually have them release their hands. So we always say that you have to, and that's what you did, which was fascinating, and it was fascinating to watch your hand gestures. You essentially had the surgeon, Dr. Walker, release his opposing forces rather than you just trying harder to push with your forward forces. So I love it.
One of the things too, I remember hearing from Ramani Munasinger about your adoption curve, and you're always going to have those laggards. And you mentioned those people in your department, Lee. We just kind of said, you know what, you guys do your own thing. We're forging ahead. And you just have to, again, figure out who you're talking to. And you never want to go against a wall, because like you said, Lee, it just doesn't work. So some of the insights gained from that.
So I'm going to suggest, because we've got 22 questions backing up, I'm going to start rattling through them. Is it time to move away from never event focused to always events? Does that resonate with you, Lee?
100%. There's this great book called Still Not Safe. And it really says that a lot of the analysis has hurt us. So I'm a big believer in that idea of safety too. I think that's what works.
We work in a very overtly competitive profession from high school to retirement. We see ourselves as better and more invincible than others in career progression. And I'm going to take that for all of us clinicians, if you see what I mean. Is that one of our problems?
It's a problem, but it's what actually drives us to do better. So I think, if it's focused on the patient, then it's a good thing. We violate general cultural taboos, particularly the surgeons. So we've got to have strange personalities, particularly the surgeons, no offense, to do something that most people can't. And that does have an effect. So if it's channeled correctly, great. And that's what I think, to be honest, the younger generation gets better than we do.
I think we all, especially in anesthesia and in intensive care, I mean, we are the people, we're very driven. And I think most of the time it all comes from a very good place. And I think that if it turns negative, that, a lot of times I think going back to this, am I safe? It's the burnout. It's, cultural anxiety and stress that we're feeling. And I've known some amazing providers over the years who most of the time are great and they are very driven, but, we all can be pushed to the limit sometime. And I think that we're feeling all of that anxiety and feeling that pressure more and more, especially through COVID. Would you agree, Lee?
100% performance pressure. Why isn't the patient asleep yet? We are catchers. We're the unsung heroes, except during COVID, which was really interesting that so many people covered anesthetists and anesthesiologists worldwide. So that was exciting. But, one of the things that I watched, and I do it here all the time, is talking to people. If I see their anxiety going up, and I did this, I really was very lucky that I had this consulting firm, Vector, who they were willing to talk to my people as part of their gift to the frontline providers and talk them down because they needed that. So I think it's absolutely true. The one thing that I do want to just say is everyone thinks I bought 2 Peloton bikes for the 7th floor above my office so that people could use that. It's not about exercise. That's about keeping your body healthy. It's actually about finding the joy in work. Mm-hmm. So I think the real problem we have today is that we think medicine is a business and we've lost that joy. So part of our goals as leaders in EBPOM, I think very much shows how we can bring joy to work by changing what we're doing, and you get much less burnout. And if you exercise, you're healthier. It's 2 different things.
We let people use their bicycles around home, Lee, but we'll work on the idea that they should do everything at work as we go forward. We'll get there eventually. So excellent talk from Claire Crookshanks. Culture is so important. The message of anxiety as contagion is really important. Reminds me of controlling the fear instinct, in parentheses, factfulness.
It was an interesting thing because you guys know me well. And, when I'm in the office, I'll take off my shoes. I'll walk down the hall. I try to be a little lighter, although I know I'm still pretty serious. But I was told that I took this command and control was during the height of this, I was very command and control. And that's what they needed in a leader. Not somebody who would go down the hall and say, be more relaxed, because they could see no fear in me. And it was, we're debriefing on that with our executive coaching team. But it's interesting that fear was my greatest fear because people were really scared. I mean, the front pages that I showed, big deals.
But in the factfulness, as part of the controlling fear is also the honesty of it. I mean, there's no doubt that the providers that we put into the front lines, or anyone in hospital, in fact, is at greater risk of acquiring COVID-19. And if you have multiple comorbidities, you're older, etc., the chances of catching it and dying from it are greater. So how did you balance the honesty that's required there as an essential part of managing the anxiety and the fear?
We actually told anyone over 65 that they didn't have to work, and we sent them home and we still paid them. Because that's the other thing people worried about is, will they get paid? It's not the UK system. So money is on everyone's mind. There were a lot of furloughs. My CRNA colleagues were unbelievable in that they took a lot of vacation and they were willing to work as respiratory therapists to try to keep the financial health as for them and for us. But the interesting question is the health system, when we didn't have a lot of PPE, started saying, well, you can reuse it. And it's like, don't say we can reuse it because it's safe to reuse it. Let's be honest. If we use it all up, we won't have someone we really need it. And if it was a COVID positive patient, we have to throw it out. So I think the hard part was there were some people trying to obfuscate and really not tell us why we were reusing PPE. I don't know if in your sites, Desiree, that was happening. And I just said, look, it's not here yet. We're still trying to get more. So that's the rationale. And I think that was appreciated. The other thing is saying we are at higher risk. So all I can do is protect you.
And what about that from your perspective, Desiree? Because you would have been through all of this and thinking about the kids and thinking about mum and dad and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think honestly, the biggest stressor for me, and I was very fortunate that, fortunate in a way, but I was furloughed as well because I'm working as a locum, so not a contracted employee. But that being said, there was a lot of anxiety around exactly what Lee said. That when people were trying to say, "Oh, well, reuse your PPE," and it's fine. Well, it's not fine. Let's get to the truth and the facts. And I think that, to me, what created the most anxiety was that people were not dealing with the facts. They were just trying to, like you said, obfuscate and, work around all of them. And so when it was, dealing with money crisis, dealing with whatever it was that was coming to us through COVID, it's like, just tell me the truth. And I've always operated in that in my practice and any kind of leadership position that I've had. It's all about telling the truth and working around it together and finding ways to bring people in and make them part of the solution, not part of the problem, and not, falsifying or trying to work around. So that was my experience.
And being anesthesiologist and anesthetist, I wasn't in the OR because I thought I was more valuable as a leader, but I was in every day at 5:50 a.m., and I stayed till about 3 until I started, collapsing maybe. And if I needed to, I was here longer. But presence, as opposed to all this virtual presence, makes a difference for people who are clinical.
Monty, you had that experience. I mean, I feel like that was part of what you did after you got over COVID yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I volunteered to go back onto the rota. So they put me back on the rota. I then got COVID-19 at home and got pretty sick with it. But then when I got better, I volunteered to go into these cancer surgery ICUs just every day for a month or so. And people say, well, what are you going in for? I'm just going in because you pop your head around the corner, you say hi to everyone, you say, is everything all right? And almost every day there was some anxiety to talk through. Should we do this? Should we do that? Etc. So I think that leadership comes in very many different guises. And as you say, Lee, it doesn't necessarily come from getting into the operating room and doing one-on-one marking of a patient. You've got to be able to cover the whole pitch sometimes. I'm going to switch another question here. Will we ever have a no-blame culture when there is a litigation culture? There is no learning without a safe place to talk. I see exactly what they're getting at here. How do you?
I do, and the rules are really difficult in the U.S. In fact, we just found out that half the meetings that in Pennsylvania, because it's all state-based, that we do are not protected. And in the virtual meetings, if we hit the record button, we are no longer protected. So where are we going to be in the same room where we can talk openly and honestly and get to that learning? So I hope we get there, but I'm not convinced.
Yeah. But let's strive for it. So the COVID effect is that our department has never been so cohesive with a unified goal and seeing the need for psychological safety. How do we preserve this? I think really reflect on that, is that the clinicians collectively really got together and said, let's just do our very best, and then recognised psychological potential weakness in people and the risk of burnout. How do we keep that?
It was my greatest fear was we were going to resurge and we would be doing Saturday schedules and nobody would get a break to recharge and talk together. So the answer is, I don't know. I mean, and I stepped down, the end of the crisis, I was supposed to be their chair for another year. So I'm hoping that the department stays cohesive, and I'm sure it will. I think that we have to continue to instill a sense of pride of what we did. I would get on the first couple days in the morning and say, and this was a really hard one, do not go into a room and intubate a patient if you don't have proper PPE. Take your time. This culture of blame, we actually got blamed by some of the staff for taking our time. And I said, because your job is to protect the public. And the only way to protect the public is to protect yourself.
Yes.
Because we need all of you. And I think we have to, as anesthetists, we tend to be, at least in the States, in the background. And the question is, can we continue to say, we're proud of what we did? I mean, we protected the public.
So Desiree, you're about to go into a new clinical quality role, it sounds like. Now, if you look at COVID-19 and what's just been reflected in that question, enormous change very rapidly with people saying, let's just get on and do it. Surely this is the moment to make enhanced recovery the new norm and, the perioperative care bundle. You can strike now while everyone's guard is down. The we can't do it, we can't change. And
that's what I'm hoping.
Then we'll ask Lee if he can back you up by making it for the country. So
that's right. Well, hopefully we'll be working together on some of that, Lee. Parallel tracks there. No, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that we've talked a lot about that on Top Med Talk, how the irons are hot. So it's a good time to strike for, improving perioperative care in many different ways and throughout the continuum. To Lee's point, and one of the things that I think is going to help us stick is that I think what a lot of us showed in this crisis is how grateful and appreciative we are of each other, regardless of what your background is. So, regardless of whether it's anesthesia, surgeon, ICU nurse, physical therapist, housekeeper, dietary, no matter what, everyone was always going around saying how much they were thankful for everything that they were doing. And I think we've lost that in our culture a little bit. And I think if we continue to highlight that and continue to take that lesson and apply that, I think it's going to go a long way for many of us.
Sagat, my collaborator, actually talks about companionate love, which is a different type of love, but it's really that joy of being at work and the appreciation we got from the public. I mean, candy, food, and I think we have to remember that feeling. So I'll stop there.
Right, so a couple of quick-fire questions to close. Learning from excellence, an alternative way to promote a learning culture, but focusing on things that we already do well, is gaining popularity in the UK. Any comments on that, Lee?
Love it.
Love it. So that's a big yes. In my experience, I find that clinical leads often create a department in line with their interests. This does not lead to diversity. How do we combat this? Reflect. This is a tough question, Lee. Reflect on your influence in your department. Do you think you pursued your own interests?
100%.
That's not a very... Yeah.
But, I was just going to say yes. But what are your interests, right?
They're pretty diverse because one of my interests is there's a great book called The Diversity Bonus written by Scott Page, an economist. And Scott talks a lot about the fact that greatness is only achieved by diversity of thought. So I think the real key is in the room, making sure that everyone feels safe enough to speak up and tell you why the leader is not doing the right thing. And hopefully that theme is one of the things I'll bring to CMS and others, is that idea of diversity of thought is the only way to get to greatness.
So that is a great dodge, because that's how you got the job. You said that you pursued your own interests, and your own interests were diversity. That's brilliant. You nailed it. So, last 2 bits. Mike Swartz says this is a very important lecture. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm going to bundle these two together because we've got to close. What does the ideal SAFE team look like? And as seniors, we may think we're approachable, but are not seen as such by trainees. And I think those two possibly overlap, Lee.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I learned that lesson really well. So the ideal team really is looking for people who think differently than you and teaching them how to speak up. And in fact, I just hired a new vice chair for education. It was a younger woman, and I got her executive coaching to have the presence in the room so she could speak up. So I actually think, and this happened to me, we had a crisis in the department, and I spent a lot of time realizing people actually thought I didn't want to hear something. So it's constantly reminding people that their job is to protect the department, not to protect me, that gets you to greatness, and that their job is to lead up. So when I hire chief residents, their job is to know how to talk to me so that I don't shut down, but I actually hear what they're saying. Now, that took 16 years of coaching by a PhD psychologist. So I don't know if that means 10 years of coaching. But that idea, I think, is really important, that we have to give more permission and actually teach people how to talk to us so that we don't shut down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lee, again, thank you so much. Thanks for everything that you do worldwide, and thanks for everything that you're going to be doing here in the U.S. What a fantastic role for you. The insight that you share all the time is great. So thanks to that. Make sure you check us out in the Top Med Talk zone. We're going to be wrapping up here, and thank you so much for listening. Cheers.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.